and it's my pleasure to welcome you towards Inclusive AI, the conference organized by our think tank and the Beijing-based Center for China and Globalization, CCG, in cooperation with New Delhi-based JustJobs Network. This conference is an official partner of the AI Action Summit 2025, which, as you know, is taking place next month in Paris. We are live on Zoom, on CERRE's LinkedIn channel, and on CCG YouTube channel. So thank you for watching us from Silicon Valley, Washington, D.C., Madrid, Geneva, Brussels, Delhi, Singapore, Shenzhen, Beijing, and all locations in between. Artificial intelligence is an unstoppable force that is reshaping local communities, national economies, labor markets, and international relations. Whatever the true potential of the technology, AI's development is, however, accompanied by concerns about its disruptive social and economic impacts as workers, businesses, economies, and societies are forced to adapt. And in addition, there's no guarantee that the benefits of AI will be evenly shared and that the social and economic costs will be evenly distributed. On its current trajectory, the benefits could be concentrated among certain countries, sectors, companies, and workers, while other entities and groups risk both missing out on the benefits and suffering disproportionately from the costs. And against that backdrop, our conference will discuss on how to ensure that its development, deployment, and government are inclusive. And the concept underpinning this conference is that despite countries having different political systems and values, international cooperation and knowledge sharing are crucial to foster an inclusive development of AI. And our goal today is to share perspectives from around the world about one, how policymakers can ensure that the AI revolution helps to address inequality within communities, within countries, and between developed and developing countries, and two, how they can mitigate any negative impacts and inequality. Let me now hand over to our partner in the organization in this conference, my friend Henry Wang, founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization.
Great. Thank you, Bruno. And also good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, all of you. Great to see all of you here. So it's great to organize, co-host with CERRE, and of course also with our Delhi-based JustJobs networks on this very timely event. I mean, prior the AI summit in France. So the issue of inequality in AI raised several questions that we will explore across our two panels today, basically. And the first panel will focus on the impact of AI on skills and employment, such as in labor market, AI enhanced efficiency and innovation, benefiting some sectors where it is effectively adopted, but it also may lead to job displacement and make some current skills obsolete. So this transition could result in structural workforce changes both within and between countries. For example, deployment of AI could amplify inequality if income distribution increasingly favors capital owners over the workers. And also governments do not adopt redistributive policies to compensate. So this raises an important question about economic equality, social stability, and need for a new policy framework to address those challenges. Of course, we have another panel, second panel, we address the need to ensure inclusive design, development, and deployment of AI. So this inclusiveness should be a priority for all governments. Recent economic work illustrate that societies enjoy greater economic growth overall when the technology and distribution fairly. So we hope that this global level, increasing inequality between developed and developing countries would risk provoking more global instability and conflict. So I think there's many issues that we're going to address on those two panels, and so we have today gathered the exceptional group of panelists who are leading voice in AI governance from around the world, including Europe, China, India, Mexico, Senegal, and of course, the United States. So to echo the point raised by Bruno, we are very pleased that today's conference is organized as a collaboration between 3 organizations present across Europe, China, US, and India. So we hope that the collaboration is a signifier that international cooperation, at least on some issues, can coexist with elements of economic and technology competition. So this is a conference, is an official partner event of the Paris AI Summit, where I think Bruno and I will attend next February. Actually, next, pretty soon, February 10, actually. So we will shortly also, after this conference, publish an issue paper covering the themes discussed today, together with concrete recommendations to inform the AI Paris Summit. So I'll now get it back to Bruno to kick off our first panel. Bruno, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Henry. Let's move to the first panel, managing the consequences of AI for skills and employment. AI has, as we said, the potential to cause significant disruption to labor markets. Its impacts will, however, not always be straightforward. In some cases, uses of AI will be aimed primarily at replacing human labor in certain job skills, but AI will also change the tasks that humans perform. And this will require workers to retrain, but it will also potentially help them become more productive and even perhaps making their work more enjoyable. And finally, AI will also create new jobs, for instance, in the field of AI supervision and AI testing. And this means that the net impact of AI on labor markets is not predetermined. Instead, it will be decided by deliberate choices about how AI is developed, what uses it is put to, and how we can cultivate the human capacity to develop and use it. And those decisions will be so consequential that it is inevitable that they must be made not only by the private sector, but also by governments, and that they should also benefit from the input from local communities. Now, in the past, economic and technological transitions such as automation or globalization have already forced governments to manage economic and social transitions. But it is indisputable that this has not worked perfectly. This has not been done optimally, which is, by the way, probably one of the reasons why political populism is on the rise today in many of our countries across the world. So for public authorities, the challenge with AI is to be more successful than it has been in the past. Developing countries and less empowered communities within both developed and developing countries have unique needs in coping with these challenges. One, low-income countries have experienced declines in productivity growth in recent years, and they are less well resourced to adapt to the consequences of AI, in particular if AI leads to less services offshoring by developed countries, challenging the business models of some developing countries, such as India, for instance. And there's also a risk that developing countries mainly become suppliers of cheap labor to support tasks like data annotation, which helps make data readable by AI models rather than meaningfully sharing in the economic gains of AI. And within developed countries, the impact will also be unequal. Research demonstrates that college-educated workers are better able to transition to AI complementary roles compared to older and less educated workers. And finally, still in developed countries, many of the professions likely to be most impacted by AI, such as clerical work or sales, those have disproportionately high numbers of female workers. So all this raises important questions about economic equity, social stability, and the need for new policy frameworks to address these challenges. And we have outstanding panelists here today to help address these questions, and we'll show them on the screen now. I'll introduce them one by one as I ask each an introductory questions. I'll introduce them, and they've accepted to limit their response to 5 minutes at the most, for which I thank them in advance, and so that we can have subsequently interactions. And I'd like to start with Sabina Dewan, the president and executive director of the India-based JustJobs Network. Sabina, while AI offers several benefits, its proliferation and evolution is also accompanied by concerns about its disruptive social and economic impacts on labor markets. So what are, in your view, AI's, how would I say, potentially adverse effects on employment in developing countries that policymakers need to be mindful of? And what transition adaptation strategies should governments adopt? Sabina.
Great. Thank you so much, Bruno. And I'm delighted to be here and represent the JustJobs Network, which has a presence in India, but is also a global think tank. So much of the insights that I bring today are based on the research that we've done in India, but also in many other parts of the world. And JustJobs Network is delighted to partner with CERRE and CCG on this event. I'm particularly happy, Bruno, that this discussion seeks to bring in the perspective of developing countries on the impact and the governance of AI. In response to your question, I broadly want to structure my intervention around 3 points. So the first point is that often we hear people talking about this wave of technology, this AI-driven wave of technology, as comparing it technological waves in the past. And we often hear people say things like, we've had disruptions in the past. Each wave of technology has come with its own disruptions. Some jobs are lost and others are created. At the end of the day, labor markets find their equilibrium and life goes on. But I'd like to kind of differ from that viewpoint, because at no point in the past have the very pioneers of technology unequivocally warned us of the inevitability and the magnitude of disruptions that are emerging. So from Geoffrey Hinton to Stuart Russell, the pioneers are ringing alarm bells, and I think we would be wise to heed them. So, definitely AI comes with certain advantages. It's not the technology itself that's good or bad, but how it's put to use and how governance happens in ways to create labor market equilibriums that really matter. That's point number one. So point number two, what are some of the disruptions that we could expect? So first, of course, there's, these disruptions will be wide reaching. I'm going to focus just on a couple that are related to labor markets. First are layoffs. To be clear, nobody can definitively estimate how many jobs will be created and how many will be destroyed. What we do know, however, is that it is not in the interest of firms to publicize how many people they will have to lay off as a result of AI. So there is a lack of information on how these trends will actually play out. For technology companies that JustJobs Network has interacted with in its research, we've heard firms anticipating anywhere between 30 to 40% of staff reductions, staff to be replaced by AI. So the effects of AI extend far beyond technology companies to other parts of the labor markets, particularly where there's cognitive tasks involved, where AI can actually do things in much faster and with larger scale than human cognitive capacity allows. For developing countries with large and growing youth populations, especially in Africa and in parts of Asia, there's already a surplus of labor, and these economies are not creating enough jobs to absorb the new entrants into the labor market. So we have high levels of youth unemployment and underemployment, as well as high levels of informal employment already. And against this backdrop, the disruptions from AI are even more damaging. Let's not forget the upheaval caused by AI comes on top of other forces, just pandemics and climate change and the energy transition that are already upending labor markets. So all of these different forces are creating a great deal of havoc in labor markets. We cannot skill our way out of these disruptions. Not only is there a digital divide, but large shares of the population of the developing world simply do not have requisite levels of education to build upon. So to imagine that these individuals that have very low levels of education will be able to participate in a skill-biased, AI-driven economy at scale is rather far-fetched. Ultimately, what we come down to is an acceptance of the fact that the income distribution increasingly favors capital owners over workers, and that governments have to have mechanisms for redistribution. But in developing countries, there are weak institutions for redistribution, not to mention redistribution is much harder when you have 60, 70, 80, even 90% of your labor force in informal employment. So I want to end by just making a couple of points about what developing countries in particular need to do. First, they need to invest quickly and extensively in reforming education systems to provide better quality education, but also digital literacy. And the skills training system, skilling and reskilling, then comes on top of a solid foundation of education. Skills training is not a band-aid solution to years of poor quality education. We also have to be really realistic that this will take time, and skills training is not a panacea for the disequilibrium that AI will inevitably bring. Second, we need to build institutions, regulations, laws that redistribute the gains from capital to labor. So in this regard, first, there's taxation. Perhaps a robot tax, as Asimoglu has proposed, certainly tax regimes that apply and reach platforms and the platform economy. We also need social protection, social security, labor regulations that cover all workers, including those in informal employment and self-employment, which inevitably means that we need to move towards more universal systems. We need regulations that ensure that firms adopt greater transparency about their intended uses of AI and greater transparency with their algorithms and their data. And finally, last but not least, we need social dialogue to ensure that labor unions and civil society are not only part of the conversations in how to manage these disruptions, but that we're actually remedying the existing asymmetries of power. I'll stop there for now, Bruno. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sabina. Let's try to stick to 5 minutes so that we can have a conversation right after. I'd like to move to the AI's impact on the labor markets of developed countries. And I'd like to bring into the conversation Juan Francisco Jimeno, who is an advisor at the Banco de España. Hello, Juan, and very nice to have you. I mean, much of your extensive quantitative research on the impact of AI on employment across Europe reveals that perhaps counterintuitively, employment shares have risen in occupations more exposed to AI. So how do you explain that phenomenon, and what does it mean for the ideas that most economists have about the impact of AI on equality and inclusiveness. Juan.
Hello, good afternoon from Madrid to everybody. And thank you, Bruno, for the introduction and the question and for the opportunity to participate in this very interesting and very relevant conference about the impact of artificial intelligence. Okay, so let me start by saying that there are two main theories on the impact of technological change on employment. One is the so-called skill bias technological progress, the idea that new innovations increase productivity, but increase productivity by more for skilled people, for skilled workers. The second theory is the routinization hypothesis, the idea that technological innovation mainly destroy jobs for workers with manual routine tasks. If we think about artificial intelligence has both components, can do both things, increase the productivity of skilled people and also substitute for many, many routine tasks. But I agree with Sabina, artificial intelligence is something else. It's a general purpose technology capable of performing many, many tasks, manual, non-manual, routine, and non-routine. So there are many ways in which artificial intelligence can displace workers on the one hand, or can increase the productivity of workers on the other hand. In my view, and let me say, if artificial intelligence were a skill bias technological progress, then the findings of my research that they increase more the employment share of more skilled workers, exposure to artificial intelligence increases by more the employment share of skilled workers is precisely what we should expect. So this is not surprising. To the extent that artificial intelligence has this skill bias component, this is not different to previous ways of technological innovation. But as I said, artificial intelligence is something else, and we should think more closely about what kind of jobs could be exposed and could be displaced by artificial intelligence. And in my view, what is relevant this time is not the distinction between skills and unskilled tasks, but the distinction between simple and complex jobs. By simple jobs, I mean jobs performing a very reduced number of tasks, which can be performed by artificial intelligence. So if you are able to do one of these tasks with artificial intelligence, then the job is gone. By complex jobs, what I mean is jobs where you have to perform many, many different tasks. You have to deal with information, you have to deal with people, you have to deal with materials, you have to do very different things. And on top of that, these are jobs with some social value. And by social value, I mean that we as a society recognize that we need a human behind this task. Let me say one example, medicine. I mean, diagnosis in health is now performed by artificial intelligence, probably with much better accuracy than humans. But we still need a doctor, a human doctor, behind this diagnosis. So this is what I mean by social value. If we go along with this distinction, then what is relevant is the simplicity of job versus the complexity of jobs. And the displacement will be more concentrated in simple jobs. What does this mean for inequality? Well, I think that it's too early to tell, because if if these simple jobs were mostly unskilled, then we should expect increases in inequality. But that's not the case. We can see simple jobs across the world. There are also very skilled jobs which are very simple. Programming, for instance, translation services. So it's not the distinction of skilled and unskilled. For that reason, I think that it's too early to say what is the impact on inequality of artificial intelligence. You can think of unskilled workers increasing their productivity because now they can perform tasks that they cannot perform before using artificial intelligence. And you can think of skilled jobs where artificial intelligence is going to displace unskilled workers. So I think that on this issue, the jury is still out, and we need more evidence about how artificial intelligence is evolving, how firms are implementing artificial intelligence, and again, how this way of thinking between simplicity and complexity of jobs and complementarity with the skills is going to evolve. And let me stop here. There are things about policies that I will comment later on, and also about the possibility of driving the implementation of artificial intelligence to improve social outcomes. On that, I am very skeptical, but let me stop and talk about this later.
Okay, thank you very much, Juan Francisco. In recent years, we've seen a decline in labor share of income with more benefits of economic growth accruing to capital. Eckhard Ernst, you are the chief macroeconomist of the ILO, the International Labour Organization. Thank you very much for joining us today. Do you see technology and AI accelerating these trends, or do you think that the productivity gains from technology and AI will help labor expand its share of income? And do you see this playing out differently in developed and developing countries? Eckhard.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bruno, and thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here and exchanging with all these great minds this morning. So let me maybe kind of get a step back and take a broader picture on this question. One of the things that our research shows is that indeed one of the key challenges of these new technologies, and I'm not only focusing on AI, I'm also kind of thinking about more other digital technologies, social media, etc., is the fact that it's not so much the number of jobs that are being affected, but indeed, what you just mentioned at the end, is the distribution of income and the concentration of wealth that comes with these digital technologies. They have an inherent tendency to create these huge multinational behemoths that essentially kind of conglomerate all type of services, digital services into one hand. I mean, you know the big names. I don't have to cite them here. So these are the real issue, that you concentrate a lot of economic power and wealth into very few number of companies across the world, and that currently also you see that the political implication of these trends is that they start interfering with political decision makers. Obviously, Europe is a key example, but we're seeing this currently also in the US playing out, and so the problem really is not so much the impact of jobs, which actually overall is relatively limited so far. And I mean, there's no real consensus on the numbers so far, what we see, but what the estimate shows is that actually a very few numbers of jobs really disappear, if anything. And what we see is the concentration of wealth. And partly this to do with the digital nature of the technology, that essentially, the more you collect data and information, the more profitable you become, and the more targeted your services become towards certain of your customers. But it's also creating this effect that because you need a lot of energy and electricity electricity to run these technologies, you kind of increasingly have that tendency that only few big players can participate in that market. And if you look at, for instance, the latest trends of generative AI, with open AI and these tools, you see that they're actually still running on a deficit, on a loss. They only can survive because big companies in the back, like Microsoft, are actually funding their pipeline. And the technology itself is currently reaching limits of improvements. So you need ever more data, ever more electricity, ever larger computers in order to be able to run these models. So that's a huge problem, that you actually see this concentration of economic power and increasing costs for societies in terms of electricity consumption and obviously the spillovers in terms of sustainability and ecological sustainability. What is more, and I think that's the real issue, is that we actually do not see any productivity enhancements coming out of this. For the moment, the productivity growth rate overall, and somebody mentioned, I think Sabine mentioned this before, is that even for low-income countries, is declining. So it's decelerating. We still have productivity growth, but if you look at big countries like China, for instance, the productivity growth has decelerated significantly. Other countries have never actually taken off properly, and they don't seem to benefit from these new technologies either. So there seems to be a problem. So we spend, as a society, you spend a lot of resources in these technologies, and we don't seem to get anything out of it. We make a certain number of people extremely wealthy, but the rest of society doesn't really benefit from it. And so I think that, that in itself is a problem. So we have started looking into this issue a bit more closely. And one of the key points that we highlight at the ILO is the fact that you need to solve that issue that is linked to the fact that the technology itself is developed in a certain direction that is not helping society. The AI is a great technology. Somebody mentioned Kenya earlier. Kenya, I've talked with the CEO of Microsoft there. Kenya is one of those countries who are really keen on using this technology to promote agricultural productivity, to help farmers, smallhold farmers there, to become more productive, to face also the challenges of climate change by having these digital tools that help them better anticipate and harvest maybe more productive crops. But that's really a small number of applications. And I think as a strategy to tackle that, we really need to go into the direction of orienting this technological development in certain ways where there are actually social benefits coming out of it. Electricity management is one thing. Mobility management, we see all these kind of big cities that are suffocated from traffic. There are applications that help us, at the urban level, to improve mobility systems or transportation systems. In the field of labor markets, we can use these tools actually to better validate and value the skills that people actually have, even though they don't necessarily have certificates. So there's plenty of applications, but if we don't orient these technological developments into that direction where they really kind of produce social benefits, I think we're missing out on this, and we only make this problem of economic concentration and market concentration even worse. I think that's the key bottom line from our research in this area. Maybe just one last point on the job side. As I said at the beginning, there is actually no consensus on which jobs will disappear and which will appear. My own view on this is very simple, is that technological unemployment is really just an intellectual fad. It doesn't really exist. And unemployment is always a macroeconomic challenge. What we really have is the distributional aspect to it. We really have that redistribution from certain, part of the income spectrum towards capital owners, as you said, but also towards maybe high-skilled people that benefit from these technologies a bit more than others. But the unemployment is really not an issue. On the contrary, what we see, especially in developed economies, is rather a lack of labor. We don't have enough people to fill on the vacancies that we currently have in countries like in Europe or in the US. In developing countries, it's a bit of a different story, but we really need, these technologies actually to fill in these gaps. But again, we need the technology that helps us to become more productive and not, just kind of make certain companies become more profitable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back, of course, to this issue of redistribution and perhaps would be interesting to discuss how we could, what kind of policy priorities could contribute to a more fairly distribution of AI benefits within and across countries. But let's get back to that. For the moment, let's continue our survey of looking at the AI impacts on labor. And I'd like to invite Henry Wai-Wang, the founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, to talk about China's policy in this area. How's China, Henry, has been planning for the significant changes in labor markets which AI could deliver? In particular, how is China evolving its education system to help improve your country's readiness for AI? Henry.
Great. Thank you, Bruno, and excellent intervention from all the panelists I just heard so far. What I think China actually is a very unique in terms of this AI development, and I think China actually catch the time to do that, because I think the infrastructure in China now probably, if we talk about hard infrastructure, is the best in the world now. They have 70% of speed railways, and and then you have almost 4 million 5G stations across the country, where Europe is only have 400,000 probably, and then you have also 1 billion smartphone users. One of the challenges China has now is, of course, China is aging before it's getting rich, and that is rapidly happening. For example, the new baby boom is not going to replace the people who passed away. I mean, there's already a gap there. Is widening on that. So that makes this AI is even more very much needed now by the society and by the government. And of course, China is trying those autopilot and all those automation. AI is going on. All the even though with some chips restriction probably by the US, China is still developing in its really in a big way, and we see China already produced over 10 million EV cars last year, 2024, which is also many of them probably in the future will try those auto stuff, and AI will play a big role. And I see low airspace flighting operated by AI is also has been experimented throughout China. The challenge is that China has over 200 million people above the age of 65. So the education is become so important in terms of the labor market. China produces 13 million college graduates every year, and then a lot of them, over half of them, are in the science, technology, engineering, all those areas. So I think the Chinese are really catching up on that. And those AI talent is also China is producing. There's many AI company, thousands of them are starting to flourish, and one of the key areas is the AI. Also, China is also a net AI talent loser to the United States. I mean, if you go to OpenAI and many other AI companies, 30% probably. AI talent are from China. So in terms of that, I think China has to do better to really maintain AI talent and also attract global AI talent to really sustain that. One of the challenges I think China has now is this education we talk about. Education with now many elementary school, primary school, high school are all AI aided education is fast developing, and that's really make a huge difference with the AI, with a variety of AI Chinese version of AI tools, also similar to ChatGPT and those things, are really accelerating the learning quality and learning speed of the Chinese talent. And then the problem is that China has 300 million migrant workers. In many big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, they are not qualified to go to local schools. And then and also these 300 million migrant workers' children are really falling behind in many areas. So those are really, if the children has the AI as a tool to educate, and the children without AI tool as an educator, you see the huge difference. Then there will be a generation gap that is going to emerge. So I think that's probably a big issue now. China needs to concern. But also I see that as developed countries, AI rich countries, and developing countries, there's also a big gap. With AI as a next generation of powering to the society and to the productivity. So I think the government has to really come up with some new policies. I think China already has a NDRC, National Planning and Development Commission, is set up a data bureau, and then they're now saying that data is now a productivity as well, the petroleum of the 21st century. Let data flow, and then also China has the largest, probably, the application scene for data. In terms of thousands of, over 10,000 hospitals in China, patient numbers, data, and all those can really lead to more big data calculation and new powers that can emerge from that, and new patterns, new solutions. So I see this industrial revolution is still going on in China, and then this new productivity is going on. AI is going to made a lot of difference. How can that help in the shortage of the labor force, the aging society? How can meet the challenge of education gap between the rural schools and urban schools, and how that also governance in terms of how China, US, EU make some kind of a global governance to help the developing countries. It's enormously challenging. So I hope that AI summit happening in AI can address some of those issues. We actually, as a think tank, as one of the most active global think tank in China, we organized the German ambassador, French ambassador came to CCG. We organized the China-EU AI cooperation on global governance. And also just last month, we had another AI panel forum in our annual forum, and we had many different industries, and also a French ambassador came again. And so I hope that this exercise is very important, and not only good for China to get many lessons learned, but also I hope that between AI developed countries and AI developing countries, we should really find a way to help each other, and also make AI not as a rivalry. I mean, let's make a collaborative for the good benefit of my country. It's a double-edged sword. We have to be careful. This AI could also self-defeating if we are not collaborating. And so I think this is so important that we talk about the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. Let's now address the issue of regional and international coordination to tackle the AI challenges to labor markets. And to comment on this, I'm very delighted to welcome my good friend Thomas Lamanauskas, who's the Deputy Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union. Hello, Thomas. Great to have you on the program.
Hi, Bruno. Thank you very much. Really a pleasure.
Thomas, you are one of the leading figures coordinating the approach of the UN institutions to the challenges of AI. So what role do you see international organizations playing in helping countries share best practices on managing the impact of AI on labor markets and in addressing the skills gap, both across countries and within local and vulnerable communities? Thomas.
So thank you very, very much, Bruno. And it's really a pleasure to be part of this panel, already hearing my distinguished colleagues on this panel sharing their perspectives on this. So I think before, of course, I'll give that example. I'll give specific examples how we help together with other UN agencies in this road. And indeed, it's great to share the role of co-chair of Interagency Working Group, or United Nations Interagency Working Group on AI role with Gabriela Ramos, who I saw will be on our next panel. So I think she'll also complement in that regard, and indeed bring the whole UN system together to help countries to adapt to the challenges of AI, but also to really leverage opportunities. And indeed, when we look, and we already heard here about disruptions, let's say, from the AI to the jobs market, but I think the word disruptions doesn't mean displacement, and I think it's always very important to bear that in mind, and a lot of, I think is a lot of times it's not about displacing jobs, but also about augmenting jobs, supplementing jobs. And I think I really heard this phrase in one of the panels that they now borrow very freely, which is like, it's not AI who will take away a job, it's the person who knows how to use the AI or other technologies for that matter better than you. It's also very interesting. So it's all about kind of how to leverage AI opportunities around the world. Now, there's other, of course, aspect is that it seems that, even though we don't know exactly, sometimes there's different assessments, how much of the jobs will be affected by AI, it's clear that for now, most assessments are that developed country, advanced markets will be affected more than, let's say, emerging markets or less developed ones. And that's because of the current jobs profiles. But that doesn't mean that developing markets cannot leverage better the opportunities, because especially of the still growing workforce in those markets and opportunities for the young populations that are really tremendously growing there. Now, again, there's a number of layers also to understand when we talk about how to bridge, how to really help everyone around the world, especially developing countries, to really leverage AI. So, of course, skills is an important part, but we also need to understand that skills is just one of the part of the interconnected mosaic. Just by addressing skills will not address AI divide. And this AI divide is through the different layers. Infrastructure divide, still 2.6 billion people unconnected at all. When you look at the data center distribution, 80% of co-location data centers in developed countries, and Africa only hosts 1.8% of world's large-scale data centers, high-performance computing even worse. When we look at the things like market concentrations, and I think already was mentioned by Ernst, actually, one firm makes 80% of AI chips, and actually one LLM player has 70%, has over 70% market value among 11 competitors, So we have these huge other technological infrastructure divides there. When you look at the AI skills divide, there's also, I think, different layers that we also need to kind of, a bit of a terminology that we need to bear in mind. First of all, when we talk about AI skills, we can talk about PhD level AI, PhD level skills to develop AI models, and we can talk about data labeling for AI. And that's the huge divide between those and between the markets and people who benefit from those. There's still, I maintain, the big gap in the middle, which is actually AI application. And I think here I would think is a huge focus is needed, because that's where the biggest benefit on the mass numbers can come into play. There's also, let's not forget, big gender divide on AI. There are currently, as per UN Women reports, only 30% of women, or 30% of AI workforce are women. It's also, back to kind of more high-level skills, is also a huge policy divide. So currently, our assessment shows that around 85% of the countries lack still AI regulations. So that AI policy divide is also very permanent, and it's very closely linked to the basic AI skills divide, because if you don't know what AI is, it's very difficult to develop policies, and vice versa. If your country doesn't have a solid policies, it's very difficult to bring that AI to the benefit. Now, a few things that we do, just kind of mindful on time. So there's a number of things that ITU does, and ITU does with other colleagues. So first of all, I would really like to mention our AI Skills Coalition. That's our flagship initiative specifically addressing this area of jobs and AI skills. So we announced that last year during our AI for Good Summit, our flagship annual one. And in Davos, just to kind of next week, we'll announce now the platform with the 25 selected partners that we are selected for 200 applicants that actually now provide that. Will roll out the skills platform for the people to benefit worldwide. We had developed things like AI Digital Skills Toolkit, allowing countries on the country level basically assess their skills levels. We have specific target initiatives like AI Skills Accelerator for Girls, for example, that targets over 2 years 1,000 girls in 12 countries. We have our Young AI Leaders initiative We have our AI for Good innovation partner with 50 pitching competitions, where we selected more than 100 startups out of 1,000 ones. We have AI and machine learning challenges, which also provide for the people who don't have access to their cloud computing capabilities and want to participate in the challenges. So it's all about really galvanizing those ideas and those movements around the world. And it's not only that we do that. Our annual AI activities, UN AI activities report shows that out of 408 activities reported there, around a quarter is related to the work and economic growth. So I can go on and go on the specific things to do, but I think the idea is to really empower the countries and the countries' people to upskill their workforce, to really leverage the benefits of AI. So I think sometimes in these discussions, we still see AI as from rather pessimistic lens. I would always like to remind is probably we won't get rid of it. So it's how we make the best of it. So over to you, Bruno. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. We are right on time, and so we have a bit less than 20 minutes to continue the discussion and to have perhaps more interactions. First of all, I'd like to ask if whether any of you has a question or a comment to make about what she or he has heard from others. I don't know, Sabina, if you want to say something.
Thank you, Bruno. I always have things to say. There are, there's 2 points that I thought were quite interesting, and I really appreciated all the comments from the panelists. The first was, with something that Eckhard Ernst said that I thought was really interesting, and Eckhard also sort of caveated that by saying this is more relevant for developed than developing countries. But the idea that technological unemployment is not real, right? And I think because of where developing countries are on the AI value chain, technological unemployment is actually real. And I think this also speaks to the last speaker's point that disruptions don't necessarily mean displacement. I think the idea that there will be displacements by AI, and maybe there will be new jobs created by AI as well. We can't discern the net effects. But the point is, how can you transition? Can you transition? With what ease can you transition? What institutions are there to transition people that are displaced or are impacted by AI? Not just those that are developing AI or using it, but also just those that are impacted by AI. How are you able to transition them into different sectors and the cascading effects of AI? So I think this is really important because it's true, it's not a displacement or, disruptions don't necessarily mean displacement, but if you can't transition workers, the net effects don't matter, right? At the end of the day. So I just wanted to emphasize that point.
Thank you, Sabina. Juan Francisco wants to come in, and then Eckhard.
Yes, thank you. Let me have 3 points, all of them with policy implications. The first one is about this idea of orienting technological innovation so we can increase social welfare. Well, we should start thinking about what is technological innovation. And technological innovation is 2 things. One is the production of new ideas and the implementation and execution of those ideas in the production of goods and services. Okay, what the history of science teaches us is that governments are not very good at scientific discoveries. I mean, many times scientific discoveries are just by accident. Sometimes they respond to economic incentives. But governments are not very good at orienting the production of new ideas. So that's why I said that I am skeptical about these policies that are trying to drive artificial intelligence in some direction rather than other. What governments can do is basically influence the implementation and execution of these new ideas. And here is where I think policies have to be revisited. In particular, labor regulation and product market regulation. where and how are going to allow the use of artificial intelligence, I think is the relevant question on this. Okay? Second point, regardless of what you think about the impact of artificial intelligence on employment, what seems uncontroversial is that the labor share is going to decrease. It's going to continue decreasing. And the labor share is going to decrease, and this has also implications for policies, because the kind of redistributive policies that we have in the past, both redistribution from capital to labor and redistribution across people, they also need to be revisited because they are not going to be effective in this new technological environment. Okay. For instance, in the redistribution for capital to labor, taxation is going to be crucial. And here, this is the field where international coordination could be more useful and more relevant. Coordination on the taxation of capital and taxation of income. Okay? And also because of demographic reasons, there are many forces driving us to revisit the way in which we have considered redistribution policies and the welfare state of the 20th century. And the third point, also regardless of the impact of artificial intelligence on employment, what seems uncontroversial is that we are going to need more reallocation of labor across sectors and across occupation. Reallocation is going to be higher. People will have to move more frequently from job to jobs. They will have to change skills more frequently. And this reallocation, this higher reallocation implies also changes in employment policies. We thought employment policies, employment protection legislation, collective bargaining, and many other policies for a technological and demographic environment very different of the one that we are going to have in the rest of the 21st century. And I think that we also need to revisit these employment policies. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Eckhart.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to make maybe 2 points, one on the impact and the other one on policies. So on the impact, I think one has to be careful. As I said before, we don't necessarily have a consensus. If you look at the literature, I mean, there's the estimates go all over the place in terms of which jobs are being affected and which are not. And that is both true, across occupations, but also across countries. If you look at it, I mean, you get really widely different estimates. And the other thing is that even if you have identified jobs that are particularly affected by AI, that doesn't mean that necessarily these jobs will disappear or that you have unemployment. We have done some work on the previous wave of technological change on robots. And what you actually see is what Sabina mentioned before, is that those countries in the emerging world are the ones that have seen the biggest impact of robots on employment, biggest negative impact. But does that mean that China has an unemployment rate now because of its introduction of robots? Not at all. China actually benefited enormously from introducing robots. And so even though, if you say the gross impact, so the number of jobs overall that somehow being affected is relatively large, the net impact is relatively small, because at the same time, you see a lot of job creation thanks to productive employment and productive growth in certain companies. So you have to really balance it. You have to go away from this kind of micro picture of looking at specific companies into a macro picture where you see jobs are being created and destroyed at the same time. And I think that's really an important aspect to that discussion. The other thing on policies. So there's a large, seems to be a large consensus about we need to tax these companies. So far, it hasn't worked at all. And I don't think it will, simply because digital companies and digital services are extremely mobile internationally. And you see already, especially with these multinational companies, they have all kind of ways of attributing their profits in tax havens. And so I think that the idea that we can tax these things away seems to be, for me at least, not particularly effective. I know that the OECD has done some work, and there are obviously all these international agreements. Let's see how much this pans out, but I'm very skeptical about how much this can help. Where I do think what we actually do think should do is that we kind of need to orient these technological developments towards areas where they're actually socially beneficial. And I disagree with Juan Francisco on this, that it can't be done. It doesn't mean that government officials or people like me or sitting in Geneva decide what these technologies should look like. It's more like that we use some of these technologies and implement them through public investment, through public procurement in areas where we see particularly useful applications. I give two examples where I think these technologies have enormous potential. One is on mobility. I mentioned it already before. And I think that there are technologies already available. You just need to implement them in order to help cities to handle and to manage better their traffic flows and to make sure that people have actually the possibility to much better integrate different modes of transportation in their daily commute, rather than all relying on one particular commute, whether it's or one particular mode, whether it's cars or buses, etc. So I think that there are ways of doing it, and actually China has experimented with this very interestingly in this area, but this requires a public initiative, because you can't do that at the level of a company. You really need the public hand to identify, to help to build up the infrastructure for that. The second point is on valuing and valorizing skills that we actually have. McKinsey came out with a study some years ago and identifying how much what your skill potential is that is not certified. And what is interesting is that you actually have a lot of experience that you develop over your life cycle that is never being certified in any diploma and any license, etc. Which means that when you change jobs, this kind of implicit skills that you have will disappear from your records. Now, AI can help you building digital certificates, micro-credentials, if you want. There is some experimentation with this, but I think, again, it needs to have a proper framework, a proper regulation. Maybe it's just a regulation question, but it needs an initiative on the public side to say that we actually want this kind of tools to develop in areas of education, certification, and helping people to improve their occupational prospects, their occupational mobility through these changing landscapes. As again, these require a public framework, and it cannot be done at the level of an individual enterprise. And I think that if we do that right, we can actually make these companies organize and contribute much more strongly to a social good than what they're currently doing.
Okay, thanks. Sabina, you wanted to come for 1 minute to answer to react to what
I want to react again to this conversation. I see as my role bringing some of the insights from the developing world into this conversation, and therefore I think it's really important to actually point out that, first of all, we don't know what the net effects of AI will be, and second of all, the very fact that we're talking about displacement and unemployment itself is a very developed country perspective, because we all know that unemployment is a really poor indicator of labor market slack in the developing world. So if you have people getting laid off from technology firms, low-end jobs, and then finding themselves in really precarious work in the gig economy, you may not see a net effect on unemployment, but you are seeing a backsliding of income, a backsliding of working conditions, and a diminishing of jobs. Gig work is not jobs. I don't want to go into that issue, but it's essentially gigs, right? So the idea of just looking at unemployment as an effective indicator of what the net effects of AI will be in the developing world is grossly misplaced. And I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Let me react, perhaps. And before we talk about policies, I think we should go one step backward. What I understand from our conversation is that for the moment, the policymakers cannot manage the huge uncertainty about how AI will impact jobs and skills. So I'd like to ask you, how could research around the world be better coordinated? And when I say around the world, I mean both in developing and developed countries. How could research be better coordinated so that there is more of what I would call an early warning system for governance as impacts become apparent? Who wants to provide some element of answer to that? What should we do?
If I may, just two quick reactions to this question. One is that we talk a lot about artificial intelligence, but we don't have real good data on how artificial intelligence is being used by firms, and how is implemented, and which kind of jobs, which workers are using artificial intelligence, and so on. So I think this is a big gap for research. The second area where I think we need more coordination is research on policies. How different countries are contemplating and are using artificial intelligence, both in the public sector and in the private sector. And let me say that I don't think that Ernst and I disagree so much on this issue about orienting artificial intelligence. Basically, what he says is that the government can influence the way that artificial intelligence is used by the public sector and by the private sector. And on that, I agree. What I said is that I don't think that the government is able or should introduce constraint on the development of scientific discoveries, and in particular on the improvement of artificial intelligence in the future, on which ways artificial intelligence research is going to proceed in the next year. So on the uses, yes, the government can and should intervene. On the production, I'm not so sure.
Okay, I've got another questions for the panel. What are, in your view, a couple of key policy priorities that you think would contribute to a more fairly distribution of AI benefits within and across countries? Who wants to come in on that?
Yeah, perhaps I could jump
Henry.
in. Yes, and what I think is that we already have some mechanism, like this AI summit we're going to have. But of course, China and the US have met in Geneva last year, and China and EU, I mean, also should start talking on those things. So my concern that the geopolitical climate is so negative, and then we're not really talking very much on those issues. I think that this is probably the very vulnerable point of global governance, that we're newly emerging, fast developing. Yet there's all the big three, for example, China, EU, US is not really talking too much. Of course, and also global South. So I think maybe mechanism like UN, how we can strengthen that, and also mechanism like G20, G7, or even BRICS summit, and maybe we should really talk more on those issues. Because I fear that this is really everybody does on its own, and many countries left behind, and then also we may get into AI negative, the development into the rivalry position, and then that's going to be very devastating for the world. So absolutely, meetings like this and different think tanks that should work together to propose a framework for the global future AI governance, which is absolutely very important. And then, of course, academics, think tanks, and industry, that let's get all the AI company work together, have an AI industry summit as well. Many things can be done, and that's why I think the focus and attention on those issues are so important, urgent, and necessary.
Okay, thank you. Thomas, you wanted to come in.
Thank you very much. And I think it's a good segue after Henry, because you mentioned UN and you mentioned need to convene. So I think it's a bit of a plug for me for our AI for Good Summit that's also taking place since 2017 now, so way before the craze of today about AI. And actually the purpose of that is to convene, and has been to convene industry, academia, policymakers. Since last year, we actually built up the level or additional day on AI Governance Day, specifically for policymakers, ensuring this inclusive convening. And actually what we discovered, we can mention governance frameworks. Actually, there's a lot of governance frameworks now already adopted. So now it's a need of mediating among the governance frameworks. So last year, for example, we brought the facilitators of different governance frameworks, for example, Hiroshima Dialogue, Korea, so Council of Europe process, others, to kind of really discuss among themselves and start to identify common grounds. This coming year, in 2025, we will convene also a separate day for academia as well. So really trying to bring that inclusive dialogue and leveraging the power of United Nations, even in the times of huge geopolitical divides. So I think this was still, as the more geopolitical divides are hurting, the more UN I would always maintain is important, because that still remains the only place where everyone can come and legitimately converse with each other. Now, however, just a little bit, because I hope and I predict that will be my last interventions here on this panel, also just to mention a little bit of demystifying that, because I liked the headline of the recent newsletter I read, which has said 2025 is the time to look at the AI in a more pragmatic way. And I think that's a kind of, for me, really correlates with me, because I think 2023, end of 2023 and 2024 was about AI, either doomsday scenario, Terminator, or like AI replacing all of our brains, Gen AI. I think now we're starting to learn what AI is and what it isn't. So I think we're kind of slowly going down to the Gartner hype cycle first hoop, So, and I think we're starting to realize that probably AI will tomorrow not replace us all. But this has risks around misinformation. It has opportunities. A lot of those opportunities about applying tools. We focus so much about the companies that develop AI models. Actually, I think the biggest, we need to, of course, look into that, because that determines the price and accessibility of AI. But we really need to look into how we apply AI. That's much more democratized. And for that, I think every country can do much more by building skills locally, by building infrastructure, access to the networks, by building access to the services and all other things. So what we need to do, and we do that through the UN, we empower the countries to help their own people. And then we empower the countries to use AI as a tool. I think also in these type of discussions, we always sometimes forget that AI skills is not as skills for themselves. It's the skills to use AI in something. I remember one of my developing country experience, in the beginning was a very unsuccessful skills building process, but people were taught IT. And then people were taught how to find prizes on internet, or how to manage their finances doing digital tools, how to educate themselves over internet. And that became successful. And I think now we need to start changing that approach to AI. It's not about building AI skills. It's that as much. It's about building skills to use AI for anything you need to do. And through that, making your country, your economy, your businesses more productive. So I think that's a little bit for me, that's why these policy advisors are not as radical, it's back to the basics, build skills, build infrastructure, try to attract businesses in your own country. And of course, keep in mind those big questions we need to resolve. And it's good just to say, we have AI Action Summit coming up. Then later, a few months later, we'll have AI for Good Summit there. So I think there's no shortage of the places to convene and discuss about that. Over to you, Bruno.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and we look forward to participating to the AI for Good Summit, obviously, in a few months after Paris. I think we've gone through this first panel. I'd like to thank all panelists: Sabina Dewan, founder president, JustJobs Network, Henry Y. Wang, founder and president of CCG, Center for China and Globalization, Thomas Lamanauskas, Deputy Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union, Ekerhard Ernst, the Chief Macroeconomist of the ILO, and Juan Francesco I'm sorry, Juan Francisco Jimeno, thank you. Juan Francisco Jimeno, the advisor at the Bank of Spain. We'll make a break of 11 minutes, so we'll resume for panel 2 at 15:25 CET, Central European Time, and for panel 2 with Henry, who is going to moderate. So all done. We're going to be back in 10 minutes now. Thank you.
Great. Welcome back. And perhaps we'll start our second round of discussion. So having discussed the impact of AI on the labor market in the first panel, we now want to broaden the conversation out and in particularly focus on the potential for AI. And if it is developed and governed in an inclusive way. So this is really a very important issue. So to start with the development, availability, and uptake on AI, there are several reasons why inclusiveness matters. At the national level, society enjoys greater economic growth overall when they ensure that both the benefits and the cost of a new technology are distributed fairly. At the global level, increasing inequality between the developed and the developing country would risk of provoking more global instability and the conflict. To avoid AI stoking the global inequality and instability, developing country needs to be able to take advantages of the technology rather than simply be subjected to its consequences. So this is a very, very important issue. However, many parts of the world have fewer capability to access, exploit, and enjoy the benefit of AI, and to ensure AI services are designed with their needs in mind. For example, they may lack infrastructure like access to energy, network connectivity, data centers, and cloud computing and computing power, etc. So that is really very big issues based on those access quality and equality. And data, of course, poor countries may also often have significant linguistic diversity, but the vast majority of the models are currently trained from North America, Europe, and China. So they may have fewer relevant database available for AI firms to use to train the models for locally relevant users. So this risk of poor countries suffering disproportionately from bias, discrimination, and incorrect outputs using AI models. So digital skill is another area. Education in many parts of the world is not really adapted to help boost digital skills in the use and the development of the emerging technologies. So this creates barriers on both development and use of AI, and also on the ability of poor countries and the community to participate in standard setting and governance process. So 1/3 of the world population, which is not yet even online, so much less having the skills needed to take advantage of AI. And of course, there is also institutional capacity where in developing countries, regulators can be less well-resourced and also do not have the political or technical resources to use or grow the govern the AI effectively. So this can lead to AI deployment which don't fully reflect the local values and needs and lack the trust in a technology which is not adequately supervised at the national level. So this means many countries and areas risk being subject to much of the global disruption of AI, rather than take advantage, and such as its impact on the economy and the labor market, without being able to enjoy an upside of this latest technology. So a further challenge we'll tackle on this panel relates to inclusiveness of participation in global governance exercises. And of course, a limited number of countries are currently involved in the various discussions on AI governance, and international forums are really also proliferating with different groups of countries ensuring their own interests and values. So how can we really build up consensus on the common stand on the global level? And larger and richer countries also remain far more engaged in international forums for AI governance than countries in developing countries. And even when countries are represented in such a discussion, not all impact communities in those countries have meaningful voice. So all those problems we do see, and actually also does exist even within the countries, and even different communities and groups. So the question is how we can ensure that AI is developed in ways that reflect different countries' development needs and priorities, and how to ensure countries have the infrastructure, skills, and capacity to use it. So this is really excellent questions. And again, we are having a wonderful panel, very prestigious panel that we're going to continue to tackle those questions. And of course, we have Sabina Dewan, President and Exclusive Director, JustJobs Network. And then we have Peng King Wang, Director, Lee Kuan Yew's Center for Innovative Cities. And we have Zhang Li Han, Professor, Institute of Data Law and Governance at China University of Political Science and Law, which is an expert that I'm familiar with. And of course, we have well-known Gabriela Ramos, old friend. Of course, we know each other for many years. And as Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO. Great to have you again. And we have Sadina Mossa Dinyene, Senior Lecturer, Chuck Homotu Kent Digital University. And of course, finally, last but not least, we have our big host, Bruno Leberherr, Founder and Executive Director, Executive Chairman, CERRE. So let's start this great panel discussion. But let's also, because of the time, let's this first round, let's limit our comments for no more than 5 minutes. And I want to probably begin the discussion by asking what we mean by inclusivity. And with our first panelist, Sabrina Dewan, President and Executive Director, JustJobs Networks. Sabrina, please.
Thank you so much, Henry. And it's a pleasure to partner with CERRE and CCG on this important event and come into the second panel after we had a remarkably insightful first panel. So let me start by just saying that every new technology has demonstrated how it amplifies and exacerbates inequality and exclusion, right? Take electricity, those that have it, those that don't. Take nuclear technology, nations that have nuclear power versus those that don't. Computers and IT, there's a digital divide that you yourself just talked about, Henry, that also divides along the lines of the wealthy and the poor. Take social media, for example, that divides between the oligarchs that control the social media and the rest of the world, right? So every wave of technology has demonstrated how it amplifies and exacerbates inequities. Now we come to AI. Given this experience, we have no reason to believe that AI will do anything different. In all likelihood, AI will do the same, but AI is not just concentrated to one area of our lives or one sector. It permeates all parts of life, society, and economies, and increasingly so, right? So again, the impacts are likely to be very deep and far-reaching. How is this inequity already manifesting? We already heard in the previous panel that AI leads to a greater, and will continue to lead, and technology leads to a greater distribution of income to capital and diminishes labor's share. But let me take you from the local to the international, national and international levels to kind of discuss a little bit more about these dimensions of a lack of inclusion, if you will. At the local level in the developing world, and that is the voice that I bring to the table, you have significant gaps in data, especially on data on certain groups such as women, unorganized workers. With such massive data gaps, it is really difficult to train AI models to be representative of diverse populations. So first, we need to, we need better data and content creation at local levels. But this itself is challenging because there just aren't enough people with the requisite level of education and skills to be able to generate enough accurate data and content, especially at local levels. Also, these countries have very heterogeneous populations that it becomes very difficult to capture, data and content that is representative. In India, for example, there are an estimated 122 major languages. It is hard to imagine producing enough data and content to effectively train AI models in the range of these different languages, major languages. So this tremendous heterogeneity at the local level makes it harder to have and build inclusive AI. When we talk about at the national level and what do we mean by inclusivity, many developing countries face a complex array of challenges in building, adopting, and using AI that can significantly impede their ability to harness AI's productive potential and for them to compete on a global scale. These challenges span several areas, and I think you mentioned a few: financial constraints to invest in AI development and research, a lack of well-established research institutions, innovation hubs that can focus on AI, and a lack of these can slow the pace of AI innovation and limit the ability of locally relevant AI solutions. You've got lack of infrastructure. So for example, we're talking about energy and connectivity to be able to host the development of AI and the use of AI, limited availability of data, which I've already talked about, limited technical capacity and human capital. As I mentioned earlier in the previous panel, in many of these countries, a large share of workers do not even possess the requisite levels of education. So it's one thing to say that the only ones that will be left behind are the ones that don't have the right skills, but we can't even talk about skilling or reskilling unless we're first talking about having requisite levels of education in economies that are driven by AI that is increasingly skill biased. So these factors limit AI diffusion in the economy, relegating firms and workers in developing countries to lower value add activities in global AI value chains. And for these reasons, developing countries have been largely absent from the forums that discuss AI governance. So this now brings us to the international level, where there's tremendous imbalance when most countries that are major drivers of AI are mostly from one country. And developing countries would need to overcome all of these barriers to ensure that their own domestically developed AI systems can effectively compete and survive. Henry, I will pause there, but I'd love to come back a little bit later in the dialogue and bring some very concrete policy recommendations on how we can overcome some of these challenges. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sabina. Excellent point. I mean, you address all those, the issues, challenges, and we face in the developing countries, but also how we can really make a better use of the synergy that we can really make good use of AI. That is really a good point to really together all of us here. I'd like to get maybe we need Gabriela to share some of those points. I mean, I know you've been actually researching on this project for quite some time. I remember last year at the Paris Peace Forum, you've been leading these ethical issues on AI at UNESCO for quite some time, and but now your lead work also on this these areas, given data is such a key input to the quality of AI models today, and so that global AI system are still representative of diverse global populations, and how we can really make a good use of that, and what strategy could we use to overcome those data gap at this area. So from your point of view, there's many issues on those. How we can work together, and you are representing the UNESCO, a big organization, and also quite advanced in the data and of course AI research. So we would like to hear from you, Gabriela, please.
No, well, thank you so much, Henry. It's so nice to be here with all of you and this conversation. Very timely as we approach the AI Action Summit. I see that this is part of these debates. And I would just follow up with my predecessor, because at the end, yes, data is the core, and we know it's now well known that given the high concentration in few firms and few countries, the kind of products that are developed through AI could not be representing well the diversity, the cultural diversity, the historical diversity, the approaches. But I would say that it's even beyond that, because data, of course, is also language, is also representation of our life, is representation of our ambitions, and therefore the way we think, the way we see the world, and we cannot go into our uniformity. UNESCO is, of course, the house of culture, and we cannot pretend that everything is homogeneous through the data, the way we manage data. But the incredible issue here is that there is this global data creation that is projected to exceed 180 zettabytes by 2025, equivalent to storing 250 billion DVDs on a paper stack that could reach the moon and back 23 times. You know, this kind of exercises. Stanford has also done very good analysis of how much data is really not accessible, because if you have half of the world or 30% of the world that is not connected to stable internet, then you get trapped into the lack of representation because you're not using it. I mean, you create data by using the technologies. And therefore, if you have 30% that is not able to connect very well, it's indeed the fact that it's not going to be well represented. And therefore, it's very important that we try to fill this very important issue. You know that UNESCO, we developed the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. That was a call exactly for that, to try to see how do we influencing on the business model, support the whole of the world, because this was signed by 193 member states in 2021. And how do we ensure that those that are really lagging behind from benefiting from AI in general could also be equipping themselves much better with the skills, with the infrastructure, with the data, with the knowledge of the technologies, and with the governance of the technologies, because also this has to be done at the national level. In terms of the data, and to avoid what you mentioned at the beginning of the fact that the concentration at the top in the upstream leads to discrimination at the bottom in the downstream. We have some analysis, of course, that are also well known in terms of how these technologies will find it more difficult to recognize women or Black people than they do to recognize white men. And that's just normal, because it's the basis on which the data is trained, and this is very important. We produced a report that was related to job postings in internet. The language we use many times put off women from applying for certain positions, because usually the training of the development is being done on CVs coming from men. So these are the kind of dangers, and that's why the recommendation, when it was adopted, included one chapter on data governance. And the main you are asking for how do we fill those gaps. Developing countries, and I have to say that through the exercise that we have launched since 2021, we have really worked with a lot of developing countries, advanced and developing countries, because all of the countries signed to the recommendation. but the reality is that many developing countries had to really be put into understanding and looking at how to deal with these issues. And some of the recommendations that were included in this international standard had to do with data governance, particularly to promote open data initiatives, including public repositories. I think it's very important the role of the public sector in terms of ensuring that data can be made available, getting together with the private sector that can generate this input for the different developments that are needed, establishing data trust, which is another area in which we can also try to fill the gaps and ensure that is accessible and diverse. But also we recommended member states to encourage dataset annotation and disaggregation to improve representation and usability across key categories like gender. And then, of course, the question of data is not only about data as the input of the development of the technological different tools and applications, but it's also your representation as a citizen, as a community, and therefore the data privacy and the data protection is also very important. That this is something that we might say, well, but that's an old discussion, but it's not. We are implementing the recommendation through readiness assessment reports. We are doing diagnostics by countries to know where they are regarding the recommendation, 60 countries around the world. And we're going to have a session on that in the AI Action Summit. And what we see is that the fact is that not all the countries really are on top of these issues. And even Chile, who is a very well advanced middle size in terms of development ladder, when they received the RAM, they had to improve the governance of the privacy. Now, but let me just say that these are like the traditional elements of how do we handle the management of data. But if you consider that when you find the solutions for certain kind of developments, artificial intelligence has evolved so fast that it's making them completely outdated. And then you remember that we were saying, oh my God, 40% of the workforce are going to be replaced, or their jobs are going to be substituted or automated. And then we have generative AI, and we know that the impact is going to also be felt in the high-level positions. Suddenly, we have synthetic content. And therefore, the machines, because of their feedback that they produce, they are also able to produce their own content in which they can learn. And therefore, of course, you can reproduce the problems that we had when we were discussing the original way in which we were gathering the data. But the fact that now you have now synthetic content where you can really produce the information that you need can be challenging for the reasons that I mentioned in terms of policies and frameworks, legal frameworks. But at the same time, they open an opportunity for developing countries to really look into how to harness these possibilities. And this lets you an open source too, because of course, open source is another angle in which all these models that are being developed can be accessible. And it's not only the question of data, but the question of using these models for coding. And then the very important issue that was mentioned before on the talents. I was really impressed because when you saw what President Biden did with the executive order, of course, it had to do with red teaming and it had to do with privacy and safety, but it had also to do with talent. And I think that there is an international drive for talent everywhere. And this is where I would put the emphasis with the developing countries, because at the end, we go back to the traditional agenda that is not because of the technologies, but because of the need for these countries to advance in their development pattern and the fact that they need to invest in connectivity infrastructure, very old friend. They need to invest in talent, and then they need to invest in these technologies. Good news, and there is an upcoming publication that we will be releasing soon on market trends on AI. There are only few firms that are really investing billions in developing foundational models. And you mentioned it, the US, China, the UK are the main drivers on this exercise. But no, not all of us have 1.5 million, 2 billion, 3 billion, 15 billion to invest in foundational models. And therefore, I don't think that that's what really should be worrying us more, because what is happening is that the smaller scale models and the use of foundational bases to develop your own applications, the acquiring of computing capacities, the acquiring of again, the elements to develop your own models is getting less expensive. And therefore, this is good news, because at the end, for a start, is not that we all need to be developing the most complex systems, but we need to be able to frame those developments that are already in the market in a way that serve our purpose. And therefore, I would also concentrate in something like this, because it will really help us to leapfrog in so many ways to use the technology to advance and to address very specific challenges.
Okay, good. Thank you, Gabriela. Yeah, I'm sure that the UN UNESCO has many roles to play, as also you indicated. I remember China actually made a proposal at the UN quite a few months ago that on how to make a good use of AI, international cooperation, and that was actually unanimously passed by the UN General Assembly and out of this Chinese proposal. So I think UN can play more role in the future on those issues. Now, I'd like to have Professor Director Peng King Wang. He's the Lee Kuan Yew Center for Innovative Cities. Maybe you can share your view from Asian point of view. Maybe, but we'll try to keep the time to the 5 minutes as we said.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you for having me here. I wanted to pick up on Sabina's point about ensuring a certain minimum level of literacy and thinking about how technologies today and the past are similar. Also, Gabrielle's point about having standards and opportunities and open source models. Let me combine them together and say that we talk about AI like it's one technology, but it's actually not one technology. There are many different types of AI. Just comparing generative AI and predictive AI, the level of access, literacy, skills, expertise, inequalities are a bit different. So maybe my first point would be that maybe when we talk about inclusiveness, we talk about inequalities, well, about access, we need to have a differentiated approach to different types of AI. And we must be clear, because each of those has its own characteristics, each of those has its own users. And if we have that, then we can begin to have a clear definition of what we're talking about. Which leads me to my second point, that if we're going to have a differentiated definitions of different types of AI, then we might need to have minimum standards, or to use a slightly older language, compulsory education. They need to put in place, right, for almost every child, every person, every adult worker, even every senior citizen. And so once we have that, then we'll know what we need each of these people to have. And the important thing now is, because things are moving so quickly, we need to keep updating that. So one of the things we are exploring is, usually when we set standards and we look at where the world is going, we take a while, we do a study, maybe talk to 100 people. And then after that, we hope to get a consensus, and then we'll put out a report. We may get to a point where we may have to work together with generative AI to make some of those predictions, forecasts, and changes sooner than later, because the pace of change, the advances are accelerating. So differentiated definitions, differentiated approach, differentiated standards, and maybe a way to keep up and keep pace with the advances that are out there. So that's my second point. And perhaps my third point has to do a lot with what I think needs to be done to uplift people's lives. Most of you talk a lot about the UN. I've done quite a bit of interactions with the UNDP. And I always remember that one of their models has always been about how the basics of life is healthcare, education, and work. So maybe as a priority, we should be focusing not just on literacy levels, but really how we use AI to create job opportunities, make economies more competitive, make companies more profitable in those economies, raise education levels, both adult education as well as compulsory education. And lastly, the opportunities for improving health and healthcare, especially personalized health, are quite strong with the new generations of AI. So those are my 3 points, and I'm happy to take any questions later or to carry the conversation with the rest of my panelists.
Great. Great, 3 points. Very good. Yeah. So those are very enlightening as well. Absolutely. I think we need to work more together on those lines as well. Next, I would like to have Ling Han. She's an expert actually on data. She works at China University of Political Science and Law, but she also looks after the Institute of Data Law and Governance Center at the university. So Ling Han, I mean, the last time you spoke well when we had the China EU AI forum, but now I'm glad to hear from you again. Ling Han, please.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you. I would like thank you for having me here. And I would like to introduce some work we did in our UN high-level advisory body on AI. And here I'm so happy to see my colleague Cynthia in our panel. Hi, Cynthia. So I want to introduce a few track survey we did in our advisory panel, advisory body. Actually, we did a risk about how do you concerned about the AI may bring in the future in the recent 18 months, and we got the result that the third risks that the experts from all over the world, from 80 countries actually, they concerned about AI is the inequalities arising from different control and ownership over AI technologies. I believe that in the inequalities that arising from AI, actually including the difference benefit from different countries and different developing countries, the gap between developing countries and developed countries. So when we talk about how we can make our AI technology more inclusive and how the AI technology can benefit all the human beings, I see in the list of our topics we want to talk about whether our developing countries can develop their own AI model and have their own AI technology. Actually, we had a talk with Cynthia during our advisory in-person conference. I think it's not the question that the developing countries whether we need to have our own AI technology, but whether we can do that. When it comes to this is what would it entail? We all know that AI actually is not some green frontier technology. AI is a super energy intensive industry. There are some statistics that currently we all know that some data centers consume more electricity than some entire countries. And we all know that most developers access computer infrastructures through their cloud services, but the cloud produce more carbon emission than the entire airline industry. So we all know that it is such a resource-consuming industry. So it's not a cost that every country can afford. The thing is, even that the developing country can afford this cost, the AI industry is not an immediate economic payoff. As far as I know, most of the AI companies, including some top big techs, they haven't found a great profit model yet. So we can see that although we heard that every country should have their own sovereign AI, actually it's not a project that every developing country can afford that. So it's not only the economic concern, but also, for example, in China, just yesterday, the Biden-Harris administration just introduced the interim final rule on artificial intelligence diffusion, want to control the exportation of AI chips and model widths. So China also has the obstacle of not having enough computing power. And also, I think every developing country has the problem of the training data. We all know that there are most population in the world speak Chinese, but also the Chinese training data only makes up 4% of all the internet data. So even in China facing all these problems, so you can imagine to this smaller country, they have even greater barriers of to have their own data industry. So I think that's why we need a capacity building network. This is also mentioned in our UN high-level advisory body final report that we recommended that we should have a global capacity building network. And also we should have a global data framework to make sure that every country can have their own computing power, talent, and training data can develop and deploy their own AI technology. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Linan. Great, you outlined some challenges and the future. Still, of course, we have opportunity, but also we have more difficult to overcome, and not only for the developing countries, but also for developed countries as well. So data is absolutely crucial, but how we can harness that and meeting all the challenges is really a big issue for all of us. And also we yet to prove that AI is going to be profitable for the mankind, and not enough side negatives on that. Great. Now I'd like to have another expert, Sadina, who is the senior lecturer, Chuck Himoto Ken Digital University. So let's hear from you, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you for the invitation first to participate to this very important conversation. And hi to Lingran, nice to see you here. As you know, there is a recent milestone, as Lingran said, in global AI governance. It is Governing AI for Humanity report, which is the culmination of the work undertaken by the UN high-level advisory body on AI since October 2023. And this report offers a comprehensive set of recommendations designed to guide the responsible and equitable development of AI worldwide. And in our report, we pointed out that the global AI governance we have today is not globally inclusive. For example, if we take a sample of the major non-UN international AI governance initiatives from OECD, G20, Council of Europe, GPI, G7, and the AI summits in the UK and Korea, and we look at how many countries are involved in each, we find only 7 countries are party to all of them. And by contrast, 118 countries are party to none of them. And these missing 118 countries are largely from Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, and Latin America and the Caribbean. 2 of our recommendations, included in the Global Digital Compact and adopted last September at the UN General Assembly, are the International Scientific Panel and the International and Multi-Stakeholder Policy Dialogue. For the establishment of an International Scientific Panel on AI, we received many feedbacks expressing the need for a shared understanding of AI at a global level. There have also been numerous requests for the UN to play a key role in supporting this new international panel. And the panel would aim to facilitate the pooling of knowledge from various countries and sectors, bridging silos to create a comprehensive understanding of AI across borders. This panel would be the only entity capable of coordinating with all existing national and plurilateral initiatives, such as the Global Partnership on AI, ensuring that efforts are aligned and effective at an international scale. The deliverable of the panel would include an annual report that assesses the capabilities, opportunities, and risks associated with AI. And additionally, the panel would produce quarterly thematic research digests focusing on areas where AI could contribute to achieving, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as sometimes ad hoc reports addressing emerging issues in the AI landscape. On the other hand, we have the intergovernmental and multi-stakeholder dialogue on AI governance. As we highlighted before, many existing international AI governance initiatives often exclude numerous states, particularly those from the Global South, leaving significant gaps in global participation. The main objectives of this platform would be to facilitate the exchange of best practices on AI governance, to ensure transparency by reporting on significant AI incidents that have exceeded the capacity of state agencies to manage, and to promote shared understandings regarding the cross-border implementation of AI governance measures. This would involve both public and private sectors, developers, and users in the AI space. These two instruments, I think, could help address these barriers and foster more participation of developing countries in AI governance. I want to stop here for now.
Okay, thank you. I know that for the really global South and developing countries, this AI is really a big issue. How we can really work together to catch up on that. And so we had 5 experts talking on those things. I know, Sabrina, you're probably going to leave soon. So we would like to hear maybe any of you any feedbacks before we get Bruno to conclude our panel as an organizer. So Sabrina, maybe you want to add something?
Yes, thank you so much, Henry. I think it's been really insightful listening to all of the panelists, and I think just to add a few more recommendations to the table, I think we need better competition regulators and regulatory regimes to combat this kind of market concentration that has come up both in the last panel and in this one a couple of times. And of course, we've heard over and over again that we need investments to build the capacity of developing countries to participate in the AI race. But I also think this idea that was brought up alluded to by a couple of panelists, that developing countries could also think about coordinating their public investments and resources and fostering also South-South cooperation to share technical expertise, research, and data, and to form coalitions that can then present their agenda in forums that discuss AI governance. And finally, I wanted to underscore a point that I also made in the last panel, which is, in addition to building AI expertise on AI, developing countries need support to build the institutions, regulations, and laws to redistribute the gains from capital to labor better. And this inevitably entails taking a close look at taxation and also looking at social protection mechanisms, social security and labor protections that cover all workers, including those in the informal employment arrangements. And importantly, social dialogue to ensure that we are bringing voices from labor unions and civil society to conversations on how to manage these disruptions. So I just wanted to add those because I think they're, we talked about them in the context of labor markets and managing the impact of AI on labor markets, but these are equally important when we're talking about actually having more effective and inclusive governance systems for AI. Thank you so much, Henry.
Yeah, thank you, Sabrina. Excellent point. I think that this global governance, which is missing. We are global governance on AI is falling behind the global AI practice, and particularly for developing countries. So I'm thinking now, the infrastructure. We have, of course, China has proposed the Belt and Road Initiative. EU has proposed the global EU gateway, and US has proposed Build Back Better World B3W, and India proposed, Indian Middle East Europe corridor. I think maybe we should have some kind of a coordination on those to help developing countries on AI infrastructure, and particularly World Bank, AIIB, new development banks, and all the global development institutions should work together on that as well. So this is really important. Of course, the UN. I mean, we have a UNESCO, always the leading force on that. I don't know. I mean, Bruno, you want to talk now, or you want to talk at the end? We could also have other experts if they have any comments to share as well.
Well, thank you, Henry. Seydina has made a number of points that I was prepared to make. First, about the discrepancy, between the number of countries which are part of all the various discussions on AI global governance, and which are very limited, and then those who are not participating in anything except things outside the UN system. So this limited participation of developing countries in global AI governance is, of course, not because of their lack of desire to participate. They want to be involved. I mean, just to illustrate my point, I should recall that there were 94 countries which ratified the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI. There are 143 countries who co-sponsored a UN General Assembly resolution on enhancing international cooperation and capacity building on AI. Seydina has rightly pointed out to the technical and capacity constraints on smaller countries preventing them from participating. But I think we should here be honest and be straightforward. There are also political constraints. We know that AI has become a flashpoint in the rivalry between the US and China. The US and China see AI as a key arena for economic competition. They also see AI as crucial to their national security. So in a nutshell, AI is a source of power and influence, and the economic, military, and strategic benefits of AI mean that countries which dominate the technology will obviously enjoy outsized influence over other countries which need access to the technology. And this matters because together, the US and China represent the vast bulk of today's AI sector. 73% of large AI models are being developed in the US and 15% in China. And that leaves only 12%, if my arithmetic is correct, for the rest of the world. And the rest of the world includes economically significant blocs and countries, like, just to name them, the EU or India. So we cannot have a situation where the vast majority of the world population is disempowered because they become merely bit players in a competition between a few large countries. Countries might be able to regulate AI once it is on the market, like the EU and other countries are doing, and we're very, very active on that front. But let's be realistic. Their ability to influence the direction of AI innovation will be very limited, especially if they don't have a large and profitable customer base, which AI firms will want to access, like the US. So perhaps for the developing countries, the best way to maximize their influence will be on pragmatic and flexible coalitions focused on areas where multilateral cooperation is indispensable. And I see an example of this in the emergence of bilateral or regional AI governance initiatives. These do not tend to be comprehensive, but rather they rather cover different issues on which the parties could agree, such as privacy or AI ethics. And this model can work for developing countries. And we have one illustration in the Digital Forum for Small States, which led to Singapore and Rwanda, Singapore and Rwanda jointly producing an AI playbook for small states. And the playbook helps to share best practices in formulating AI strategies and shape inclusive global governance on AI. So where does that lead us? I would say that given the reality of geopolitical competition, I think the most viable approach to global cooperation is to recognize that countries have values and they have economic interests. And we have to work with a complex and somewhat fragmented set of approaches and help ensure that where necessary, differences can be accommodated, or at the very least that they can coexist without fragmenting the global cyberspace. And in the CERRE project on the global governance for the digital ecosystems, where you participated, Henry, we initially proposed in 2022 the concept of a digital stability board, which would be inclusive, not just including governments, but also industry, NGOs, civil society, working to identify and make progress on areas of AI where cooperation is plausible. And we presented this to President Macron in November 23 in Paris. And I'm pleased to note then in its final report of last September, as Sedina mentioned, the United Nations High-Level Advisory Body on AI advocates for something which is not very different from what CERRE has proposed, i.e. the creation of an independent international scientific panel on AI and a global dialogue on AI governance. Therefore, to conclude in 15 seconds, I would say that we can and we should continue to argue for the need for genuine global governance, which improves diversity and inclusion, and the most powerful countries to shift away from an arms race and engage with each other in a more meaningful way on topics where this is possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bruno. Absolutely. AI for good, and we should not AI for arms race. And I remember Graham Madison told me that he and Dr. Henry Kissinger, before he passed away, the last piece of their essay on the foreign affairs was about how to prevent AI, arms race and also the threats of AI to the mankind. So we have to be really extremely careful for that. I see Gabriela is waiting there for some time, but we'd like to hear from you. You've been championing this for many years, particularly on ethics and all those governance issues. We also like to hear from you again. Gabriela, please.
Well, just a comment, because I completely agree that in terms of defining the major developments on AI, yes, there is this high concentration of capabilities, there is high technological concentration, but in terms of debating the issues, in terms of thinking about the issues, how to address them, I do not agree that the Global South is absent. I have been working since 2021 first, well, since 2020, because in 2020 we developed the recommendation on the ethics of AI, which is particularly about policies to frame the developments. Because I think that we are forgetting, we're talking all the time about technology and the technology, how is it coming, and the capacities, and what is important is the policies and the frameworks that we have in countries to make sure that the technologies that are going to be deployed conform to certain norms and to human rights, human values, and human dignity. And this is exactly what the recommendation has done. But then there is something else that I think we are also forgetting. Countries have very different capabilities. But in my experience, because it's not only the recommendation, but we have the readiness assessment methodology that is a diagnostic tool to know where countries are in their trajectory to use AI for their own purposes, to have a national AI strategy, to have institutions that are in charge of this, to have legislation that is in charge of this. I think this is very important, because at the end, no matter which big multinational is going to get into certain countries, they will need to go for the laws of the land. And therefore, it's very important that we have these discussions. And we're doing 60 readiness assessment methodologies from India and the Netherlands and Mexico and Brazil to Somalia and Seychelles and Philippines. I mean, 60 countries that are discussing these issues, that are looking how are they prepared to do this. And I feel this gives me a lot of more hope that when I'm hearing from the panel, because we live, yes, in a world that is very, very geopolitically complex. We are also facing the fact that sometimes some big companies can decide whether they eliminate content moderators or not. But at the end, look at what happened in Brazil. At the moment they felt that the social media was going to be producing negative harm, the laws then came in and put it together. And I was very happy, Selina, for example, I love your report, because the report was saying, yes, rely on the already existing capabilities in the UN system. And they were recommending that UNESCO and ITU, because we coordinate the work of the 45 agencies of the UN system in the intergovernmental working group on AI, to support the scientific panel. Or if we have the Global Forum on the Ethics of AI since 2021, where we gather all these countries to discuss their RAMs and their capacities, well, then let's just rely on that for the dialogue. So I think that there is more commonalities and exchanges that one meets the eye. I'm not denying the challenges that we face, but there is progress. And by the way, there's also a lot of homework to be done. Probably the more advanced countries, you cannot just say that they are all very well equipped on the institutional and regulatory frameworks. But at the same time, if your R&D investments in countries like my own is not reaching 1 percentage point of GDP, there is homework to take advantage of this. It's not everything in the global context. It's also a very important national agenda to be well prepared. And I think that that's exactly where we're working with member states to implement the recommendation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gabriela. Yeah, this is a great comment, and absolutely. Global South, as many say, I think we have to really how we can build up the consensus and really get UN and all the more focus on the global governance on AI. For AI for good is really the challenge we're going to embrace. I see Bruno now raise your hand. Maybe you could add something.
Yeah, just a quick word. Clearly, I'm not disagreeing with Gabriela. I think that the figures that Selina and I quoted were figures about the limited Global South involvement outside of the UN initiatives and achievements. And I think this highlights the usefulness of the framework and the initiatives that are being taken by UNESCO, by ITU, within the framework of the Secretary General high-level advisory body on AI, etc. So I think this is. I just wanted to clarify this point about what we said concerning the limited involvement of Global South outside, I repeat, the UN institution. Thanks.
Okay, great. We probably run out of time. We have to conclude now, and it's really great to join us for this very insightful discussion. And of course, we have been talking about ensuring AI, which is a fit for all parts of the world, and we have had a very stimulating discussion that about the way we're looking ahead. And of course, I think that the main takeaway we may have is that to really avoid the AI, stoke global inequality and of course instability, developing countries need to be able to take advantage of this technology, rather than simply be subject to the consequences. I think that is really we mentioned at the beginning as well. So developed countries needs to provide more systematic and organized support to developing countries to ensure they have the infrastructure, skills, data, and institutional capacity available to enjoy the benefit of AI. So which means I think US, China, EU, and all the India, and maybe all those big countries should work together. And also large and richer countries remain far more engaged in international forums for AI governance and probably than developing countries. And I think I see that has been UN again can play more roles to bring everybody together. And more flexible forms on global governance probably needed to really to avoid that AI rivalry and maybe making AI for good for the mankind. And finally, I think we had there's a debate about the extent in which developing countries need their own AI, or whether they should focus on ensuring global models adapt to the local context. So there's two ways of doing that, and maybe we should really have more standardized and more globally applied AI tools that maybe fits for all. That maybe it should be developed for that. So given AI dominance governance is dominated by power struggle at this time, we really need to really get global strength and global governance on that, and get out of this really rivalry mentality that we are probably so plagued by this geopolitical situation. So I think we really look forward more dialogues, more discussion like this, and to really find a common solution for our AI bright future rather than a negative future for the mankind. So that's all for me. I don't know if Bruno have anything to say at the end. Maybe we can conclude this after your speech, maybe.
Thank you, Henry. This has been a very rich set of insights and inputs, and I'd like perhaps to just to some of the takeaways that quite selectively, and I would like to mention the takeaways from these exchanges. First one is that the impact of AI on labor markets are potentially very significant, and they could happen very rapidly, but there is still a lot of uncertainty about their scope and about which workers, which communities, which countries will be adversely affected. My second point is about policymakers. They should identify how they can proactively steer the technology towards uses that enhance inclusivity and ensure that everybody can benefit from the potential of AI, rather than merely trying to compensate those who lose out. Third point is that some disruption will be inevitable anyway. So policymakers need to have a toolbox ready to help protect workers managing the transition. And countries should share best practices about how to achieve this. And this may, over time, require countries need to reform their welfare and fiscal policies to avoid deepening the digital divide that we mentioned. The fourth point is that discussions about these issues need to be inclusive, and they need to involve workers, civil societies, academia, and impacted communities rather than just national governance. And finally, regarding international coordination, I see at least two reasons why it's essential. The first one is that the impact of AI on labor markets will cross borders. As AI will impact cross-border trade in services, for instance, decisions which are about AI, which are taken in one country, will clearly impact labor markets in other countries. And the other reason is that developing countries will have a tougher time tackling the challenges of AI on labor markets. So it's essential that these countries can share knowledge, share best practices, and that developed countries ensure AI empowers workers in these countries rather than leaving them behind. So, Henry, dear friends who are watching us, it's time to conclude. We will publish in the next day a paper covering the themes which have been discussed today, together with concrete recommendations to inform the Paris AI Action Summit. Let me take this opportunity to thank again all our distinguished panelists for their formidable input and invaluable participation. I'd like to thank you, Henry, and your efficient CCG team. I'd like to thank also Sabina Dewan and JustJobs Networks. And I'd like also to thank very, very warmly Zach Meyers, Christina Hansen, and Zoe Carlson from CERRE. All together, across the time zones, you guys have made this event possible, and that's super cool. Our collaboration helps illustrate that international cooperation remains a necessary condition to making a better world, and in particular ensure that we make the most of the AI revolution. So goodbye and see you on our channels.
Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you all.